Let's start again. Let me say thank you to the Latin American Institute, to the Southwest Research Center, and the Greenleaf Fellowship for the opportunity of being here. And I am going to present an ongoing research about border postcard. I don't know if people on Zoom can hear me well, Marlene. Yeah?
I sounds like they can't. No one's complained yet.
Okay, perfect. So if anything happens, you leave a message in the chat. Okay. So the conference is titled "Dead on the Other Side: The Mexican Revolution Through the Lens of U.S. Postcard Companies." And again, it's an ongoing research. And some images that I will show, are hard to see because of the topic. And also some images are archival images. So they don't have like the best resolution or the best quality, but they work for the purposes of this presentation. Okay, so in the Mexican Revolution, an unknown number of US-based photographic companies produced images of death and sold them as postcards. The events of the early 20th century brought war correspondents to Mexico who report on the institutional politics and battles that took place during the revolutionary decade of 1910-1920. In these years, photographers profited from the postcard business, which was a common enterprise. These postcards, seen from today, are archival resources of the visual memory of violence, and invite us to critically consider the link between image and history, as I will attempt to show in this presentation. Through my reading of postcards depicting death in the Mexican Revolution, I explored a critical concept of the image that inhabits at the core of the writing of history, as well as I argue that these gruesome images of violence contain a potential visual memory that needs to be reassessed today. I understand the link between image and history, as well as the potentiality of visual memory, by considering contemporary reading of Walter Benjamin's concept of history and his dialectical image. Benjamin put forward a singular view of image, history, and time in his manuscript on the concept of history and the Arcades project. His philosophical approach to history aims to suspend the understanding of rational systems of knowledge, such as positivism and historicism, as contemporary thinker Pablo Lopez pointed out in the introduction of his Spanish translation of Benjamin's crucial text. Benjamin's dialectical image disrupts as discontinuity homogeneous regime of temporality. It refers to the image of a flash that the materialist historian, who is formed by a non-traditional conception of Marxism and refuse the idea of linear progress, can only grasp in an instant of danger that reveals a different meaning of the past. Benjamin's dialectical image is a flash. It aims to interrupt traditional historical narrativization and emerge as an indefinite and ambiguous concept. In the further end of his arcade projects, he referred to the dialectical image as that which has been united in an instant with the noun to form a constellation. This constellation shows an instant that is not fixed, that is not a fixed concept, but a potentiality in a constant movement and change, as Samuel Weber has suggested in his book Benjamin's Abilities. With Benjamin's constellation and potentiality of the noun, the dialectical image implies a different exploration of history and its concept, by confronting the structure of monumental knowledge and homogeneous memory that persisted in the 19th century. So far, the dialectical image also triggers critical questions toward the future, including debates in the philosophical field, art history, visual culture, and the Latin American intellectual tradition until today. Despite the ambiguity of the dialectical image, contemporary interpretation consists in making a critique of violence of progress through Benjamin's enigmatic concept. Following Benjamin's critique of the dominant temporal regime, progress, it is possible to consider that the linear time sustained a collective or social oblivion of obscure episodes of the past and enhance the regime of Western orange power by consolidating this ideology of progress, which offer a controversial promise toward the future. Benjamin's Critique of Progress contains key elements for understanding photography as a possibility of suspending homogeneous conception of temporality. Following his theoretical approach, the time of the photographic instant as a flash interrupts historicism as the monumental narrative of the past. By considering the singularity of photography in his essay World of Light, thinker Eduardo Cadava observed the photographic fragment as a moment of danger that is similar to the moment of danger of Benjamin's dialectical image. This instant indicates a temporality of fragmentation that leads us to a movement of interruption and suspension. In this movement, image and history become indistinct concepts. The dialectical image and the concept of history indicate together a pathway to a non-traditional approaching of the past, as well to non-chronological temporality. In this emergence of historical time, the photographic fragment exposed the ruins of monumental historical narrativization and suspend binary opposition as contradiction as the model of dialectical progress. These photos of the ruins of Columbus, New Mexico, introduce the perspective I am considering, a perspective that explores the Mexican Revolution beyond the romantic version of this event as the second foundational moment of the modern nation, after its independence from Spain, or as a different approach than the monumentality of historicism. The photo was taken after the invasion of Villistas rebels into US territory in March of 1916, an invasion from the other side that provoked important consequences for photographic production, as well as we will explore later by analyzing the link between military action and the development of the photographic apparatus in Latin America. In Mexico, the revolution interrupted the philosophy of progress, intellectual scientific thought, and capitalist development that characterized the Porfirio Diaz regime, which ruled the country for 4 decades before 1910. However, the institutionalization process of the revolution created new form of progress through the development of a national culture supported by the same political party that controlled the government for 70 years, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI. The complex civil war or revolution that began with the triumph of the anti-reeleccionista movements led by Francisco Madero after the Battle of Ciudad Juárez in 1911, in this sense, is an intensification of violence through a continuous or permanent state of exception in Mexican political history. Given this continuity, the end and consequences of the revolution are a matter of debate. It lasted at least until the proclamation of the Mexican Constitution of 1917, but other internal conflicts, such as the Cristero War, impacted the country until the 30s, when the populism of Cárdenas, based on the nationalization of the oil industry and the reform of land properties, consolidated the hegemony of the PRI, according to Gareth Williams in his book, The Mexican Exception. Afterwards, the country faced political violence throughout the century. Historian Lorenzo Meyer, among others, has described the PRI government as authoritarian regime with fake democratic faces. In its ideological construction, the PRI took the photographic production of 1910-1920 as a cultural product to restructure the historical version of the agrarian rebellion, forget the crude violence, and reduce the peasant uprising to the constitucionalista or institutional project. The institutionalization of the photographic memory of the revolutionary decades consolidated a visual corpus that became an emblem of national cultural policy and homogeneous consensus. The institutionalization of photographic production about the Mexican Revolution is paradigmatic. Historian John Marks, for example, in his extensive reading of the Mexican photographic tradition, has asked about its construction of the national mythology around the work of the Casasolas. The Casasola archive cleaned the violence of the revolutionary decade or minimize the level of death that the conflict reached. The archive has played a crucial role in the post-revolutionary appropriation of the historical meaning of the revolution. For Marx, it could be said, quote, it could be said that there is a parallel between the kidnapping of the revolutionary photograph by the Casasolas and the pre-monopolization of that milestone. The official story, concocted by the pre-ideology, invented the revolutionary family to hide the fact that the armed struggle was defined by a war to the death between irreconcilable groups. End of the quote. In short, the Casasola archive and the pre create document of national culture while cleaning this document of barbarism. In this cleaning process, political photography served as a cultural trophy for the official party. I consider that the postcard counterpose the official homogeneous vision of the revolution, but the phenomenon goes beyond a simple opposition. The US postcard producer represents a grotesque and racialized vision of violence in Mexico. But I do not dismiss these sources or reduce them to a vague discourse against colonialism or imperialism. In the phenomenon complexity emerged the visual memory of violence despite the colonial status of postcard production and as a distinct case from historical representation by national photography. This memory confronts us with the materiality of corpses or the very instant of death of the rebels, constitutionalistas, or even American soldiers involved in the conflict. The controversial postcard phenomenon contains a unique link between photography and history, as these images subvert a state-sponsored interpretation of visual resources. In other words, the postcard exposes an opportunity to deform the visual regime that exclude the bath of blood from hegemonic narrative and necessitate a more complex evaluation than the counter-hegemonic critique against US imperialism. By considering the phenomenon from an heterogeneous point of view, I argue that the potentiality of archival photography offers new triggers for empowering a critic of violence today. The execution we see, for example, is a postcard reproduced since the annihilation of 3 rebels in Mexico in 1916. By 1910, technologies for producing and reproducing images were popular in Mexico and the United States. Technological innovation surpassed the precariousness of 19th century daguerreotypes with the mass reproduction of postcard and other type of photomechanical images, such as illustrated media, stereographic plates, or lantern slides. The photographic massification and reproduction of images allude to that as an aesthetic object and main figurative motive in the revolution. The postcard of this execution is attributed to Walter Horne, who founded with H.E. Cotman the Mexican War Photo Company, based in El Paso during the revolution. Like this photo, many others circulated showing the scene of death, mass graves, hanging execution, or corpses lying in the desert. According to historian Vanderwood, Horne's company was the most successful postcard producer of the era. Today, Horne is the leading name in studying frontier postcard. His success exposes a transnational system of production, reproduction, and consumption of images. Deadly sales nourish the postcard business. His company delivered thousands of cards during the revolution. In May, Horne wrote in his letter, preserved at El Paso Public Library, I am feeling well, and we have 16,000 cards overdue with order at this time. I have sent 7,800 cards to New York City today. His business gained exceptional appeal in American cities just months before peasant rebel leaders Pancho from the north and Emiliano Zapata from the south occupied the government palace in Mexico City during the November 1914 interregnum, one of the highest points of the revolution. Horne took advantage of the combination of the technological development of the photographic apparatus and the viewer's anxiety to learn about the chaotic and violent events on the other side. Horne, as others, participated or accompanied U.S. Armed Forces operation in Mexico. Indeed, an important part of his postcard and others were taken during the direct intervention of the U.S. Armed Forces in the revolution. The two key moments are known as the Occupation of Veracruz in 1914 and the Punitive Expedition commanded by General Pershing in 1916 and 17. Military action produced another type of photography in comparison to the images committed to national politics. The development of the photographic apparatus parallel the technological deployment of military weapons and represent the consciousness of a dominant Western subject. As the writer Ernest Younger during the World War I note, photography is a technology and a tool of military calculation. In Mexico, in the 1910s, the military action supported the production of postcards. Postcard entrepreneurs or photojournalists went to armed mission, and soldiers in forts or camps far from their places of origin bought these images. The significance or the meaning of these images, however, is not reducible to the intrinsic colonialism of a techno-military intervention in a foreign country. This postcard also interrupts a pure engagement of photography with Mexico's internal political history and offers a point of escape from the hegemonic gaze that in this context has to do with the monumentality of the Casasola archive. Border postcards overcome the nationalist or epic-based vision of the revolution. They do not belong to an homogeneous structure, while their heterogeneity allows us to ask, through alluding to archival resources, question about time, image, and history in the present. These photos are disseminated in archives in the United States and Mexico and categorized in multiple collections, which are open for future research. In his reading of Jacques Derrida Archive Paper, Eduardo Caraba points out that the archive is not only a question of the past, but also about the future. The archive, as a matter of time to come, interrupts the rational calculation of temporality and the traditional representation of historical events under the promise of progress. The unpublished images, in their singularities, unfold enigmatic paths beyond the homogeneous interpretation of historical visual sources. In front of the vast photographic production of 1910-1920 in Mexico and the United States, my research assumed this incalculability, which is also complemented by a no dimension in terms of authorship's copyright duplication places years, peoples, among others. Okay. So here, for example, we see men identifying as war correspondents from major US newspaper who covered the Punitive Expedition. In the other photo at the left, right, or the right, yeah, we see an identified woman with a camera at an identified depot station that appeared to be used by the US military during preparation for the Punitive Expedition. The first, the image with the photojournalist, is part of the Theodore Hedlund collection. Theodore Hedlund was a correspondent from the Boston Post and left a well-organized corpus of these images. The image, another similar of the photographers who covered the expedition, is housed at the Palace of Governor's Photo Archive in Santa Fe and the Southern Research Center here in UNM. The second is a photo with no filter information. The contrast, I saw it as a lantern slide, why probably, I mean the second photo. I saw it as a lantern slide, why probably it was produced in more than one format. The contrast in this photo between the unidentified woman and the identified man exemplified that image authorship is a gendered construction and that we should look at these images with a suspicious eye before attributing images to the work of Anglo-male photographer. The written information of postcard is difficult to verify or directly confusing as well. The case of this postcard of Pablo Lopez, a famous guerrilla fighter who participated in Columbus and was hunted by the US Army, for example, has triggered doubts, questions about the true identity of the corpse. Historian Vanderwood asked, did Walter Horne write Lopez's name on the image to represent the capture of a popular rebel and make a popular postcard? We don't know. We don't know if this body is indeed Lopez or not. Historical information on the boarded postcard is ambiguous. Also, the contribution of the name Vanderwood, or more recently by Claire Fox, have shared objective data on the phenomenon. Similarly, contemporary archival institutions that preserve these resources offer relevant research aid on these period images. Nevertheless, unfamiliarity seems to be a condition of postcard, and the value as historical photographic source remains enigmatic. This enigmatic condition, however, could be a possibility to consider photography potentiality beyond authorized version of the past as it authentically was, to paraphrase Benjamin. Photography as an enigma, as Derrida Roland Barthes' contribution, is an opportunity to disrupt homogeneous conception of temporality and to inhabit a question on the photographic image and history beyond the discovery of representational values. With this in mind, the photos concerning the US military intervention may show a different approach to the Mexican Revolution, which I'll follow as a non-representational concept of history and following the traces of the fragment and instant of danger, which allow me to formulate a question on violence against the clean or whitewashed version of the revolutionary decade. The phenomenon of US postcard in the Mexican Revolution is related to US imperialism in Latin America, which has been studied in a series of historical moments, the Banana Wars of the late 19th century to the early 20th century, which is also the context of the US intervention in Mexico in 1914 and 1916-17, the alliances with Central American armies, governments, and paramilitary groups during the Civil War of the 70s and 80s, the context of the Southern Cone dictatorships, and the war on drugs in Colombia. U.S. foreign relationship, have marked the destiny of national stories of Latin American countries by countering revolutions, confronting guerrillas, promoting anti-communist policies, and supporting local armies that carry out genocide and massacres in Latin America. In addition, this US intervention often reproduced racial stereotypes and discriminatory narratives in American popular culture. The Anglo-Saxon viewpoint of American photographers during the Mexican Revolution is one example of that discrimination. They reproduce stereotypes through the racial representation of savage Mexicanos salvajes, and portray the civil war with political indifference toward Mexican internal affairs. According to the essayist Dr. Atl, the Mexican Revolution is one of the most keenest manifestations of the world conflict. So the Mexican Revolution is not only about Mexico, but it involves US and also Europe. In it, the US played an active role in the defense of American economic interests in the oil industry, railroads, irrigation canals, among other areas of development that arose in Mexico with the progress of the Porfirio Diaz regime. Photography, as I intend to show, is one of the economic development that the Americans took advantage of. Images became a special consumer product. Then, the US military interventions in Mexico provide the context to deploy the photographic apparatus and produce images that portray violence in gruesome scenes, at this image we are seeing. The first of this intervention was the US occupation of Veracruz. Starting in April 1914, the US Navy occupied this city for 6 months. Photographer captured the occupation, US military warships, buildings in ruins, dead bodies, etc. The occupation, ordered by President Wilson, was a photographic event. It was a response to the Tampico incident when Federalist Mexican detained US sailors and represent a turning point in US foreign relations in Mexico. So the Tampico incident was like an excuse to invade Mexico. And Veracruz represent a turning point because the US began supporting the Constitucionalista army led by Venustiano Carranza, an army that was at war against dictator Victoriano Huerta. The latter had seized power a year earlier with the support of the US Embassy in Mexico City. So the US first supported Huerta, and a year later they support Carranza to overthrow Huerta. With the occupation of Veracruz, the United States became an ally of the Constitucionalistas, especially after the Constitucionalistas army went to war from 1915 with the United States main enemy, Pancho Villa. So it's chaotic at some point, because the US supported the Constitucionalistas, but they also they had some conflict as well. German photographer Hugo Breme portrayed the US troops in Veracruz. The Sauer Research Center and the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles currently house these images. These photos are resources for reflected on the work of Breme, an iconic photographer of Mexican identity. He created a folkloric avant-garde movement in the 19th century and developed a unique style during the rise of post-revolutionary photography in the 1930s and 40s. Through these images, it is possible to affirm that artistic photography was not a stranger to the documentary postcard business during the revolutionary decade. The border between art and documentary becomes unstable. Breme took advantage of military intervention just like other postcard producers. His images of US warships and sailors tell us about the impact of the war on photographic production beyond a specific scene, making me consider this phenomenon as one that is not a simple contradiction between local Mexican identity photography, Mexican identitarian photography, and international colonial military photography. Thus, the importance to interrogate the link between photography and history through a revelation of the photographic archive of photos concerning the American intervention. This question implies that photography contains an enigmatic correlation to death that traditional oppositional categories cannot account for. In these photos preserved in the Library of Congress, we see American corpses. So there are two photos, and then another one. This image by an unknown photographer shows the victim of the conflict. As we know from the archival description, the boat carries the bodies of the Americans to another ship named USS Vermont. The picture was taken on July 15, 1914. And we also know that 2 months before, in May, President Wilson commemorated American soldiers killed at Veracruz in a funeral held in New York. Looking at the corpses in these photos, I consider that photography not only construct historical events, but trigger a question about time and death beyond a sense of geopolitical antagonism. The photograph brings forth a reminder that exceeds the binary opposition between North and South. As a question about that, photography implies a heterogeneous level of interpretation, as we will see with images concerning the second intervention of the US Army in northern Mexico. After the occupation of Veracruz, the fate of the country was chaotic. Since 1915, Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata confronted their former allies, Carranza and Obregón. So they were together at the beginning, but then we have two revolutions, the institutional revolution of Carranza and the peasant rebellion of Villa and Zapata. In 1915, Villa's defeat in the battles of Agua Prieta and Celaya weakened the rebel forces, but they still managed to invade the United States in 1916. The invasion of Columbus is one of the few military attacks against US territory since its constitution as a modern state. Also, the area had its own war in 1846, 1848, when the United States annexed the Mexican territory. After the invasion, in 1916, the US responded with the Punitive Expedition, which gave postcard producer and war correspondents the opportunity to get a closer look. The photographs surrounding the Punitive Expedition are crucial material to assess Border's postcard archival images. According to Claire Fox, the Punitive Expedition marked the birth of a particular form of military industrial organization, and second, the events of the American intervention were recorded and distributed employing relatively new form of visual technology. The military operation was massive and implied a new opportunity for photographic production and selling. This new market bloomed when Marines at the military camps bought postcards to send to their relatives or friends in the United States. Furthermore, newspapers in the big cities sent photojournalists to the border to cover the war, as we have already seen with Theodore Utlum from the Boston Post. American soldiers, weapons, machines, military camps, photographers, filmmakers, the technological image burst into this expedition. The photographic motifs are diverse. Exotic animals, trucks on their way to Mexico, airplanes, soldiers resting in tents, or cats. Or corpses, or dead bodies. Historian debates on Pancho Villa's reason for invading the United States in 1916. The historical hypothesis may say it was a revenge for a failed armed deal with the Columbus-based American, or even a German conspiracy to attract US military attention during the First World War. President Wilson responded to the attack, and the US Army sent new weapons to the border, including photography. It is possible to speculate that the operation on the border were also a training sport for the development of more sophisticated weapons to be used later in Europe. In this photo, we see a black company. It is not a postcard, and I don't know if it exists as such in other types of places. But it's normal to see an image, and then this image can be a postcard in another place. It's the point of reproducibility. That postcard, we should remember, also comes from a photographic tradition that portrayed the lynching of African American people, and this phenomenon in the United States persisted until the 20th century, as the contemporary research project Without Sanctuary reminds us. Black people, as in other words, were sent to the front line and placed under General Pierce's orders to raid Pancho, who was never found in the expedition. In the picture, as in that of the soldiers led in Veracruz, a critical question suspends and is key and a structure based on binary opposition. Although the Anglo persists as the dominant subject of the photographic production, the photographic experience involves more complex levels than a dialectical contradiction reduced to colonizer versus colonized or master versus slave. The binary perspective represents a teleological concept of history. From my point of view, I consider the phenomenon by assessing its heterogeneity, the unknown historical meaning of the photos, and the potentiality they contain to critically consider racial, political, and social issues today. In other words, the photograph of the US military intervention in Mexico are an open space for critically reflecting about heterogeneous issues. They involve US internal racial violence and the white-oriented discriminatory popular ideology that represented the internal civil war in Mexico, which was a conflict between institutional revolution and a peasant rebellion. In this context, politics and war coincide with the era of technological reproducibility of images, and the explosion of images triggered a question about history as an heterogeneous concept. Okay, so the postcard without so now you see this one, right? Without doubt, exposed the violence against Mexican, which was justified as a revenge for Columbus' invasion. This image, as others that we have seen in this presentation, belongs to an interesting album housed at the Southern Research Center. So it's the Punitive Expedition collection, but the album, the original album, in its cover is titled Album of Poncho Villa with O instead of Pancho, a typo that perhaps is symptomatic of the indifference that characterized Americans regarding Mexican politics. In the image, the burning of enemy victims and the label show a violent, discriminatory point of view of the Anglo-Saxon who regarded American invader as a social disease. The graphic violence of the scene, with people posing behind dead bodies, along with the hateful labels, make this image an example of the suprematist vision of postcard. Then I ask on how to approach this violence and what to say about past photographs containing this kind of horror. One of the most influential readings of Walter Benjamin regarding image and history has been presented by George Didi-Huberman. In What We See Looks Back at Us, lo que vemos, lo que nos mira in Spanish, Didi-Huberman exposed the notion of critical image as a contemporary approach to Benjamin dialectical image. He developed this concept, critical image, as an eruption of the image that provoked a crisis on the homogeneous representational structure. It is an image in crisis as it shows history as ruins. As well, it implies the crisis of the image since it differs from the representational meaning of visual surface. It is possible to aggregate that the critical image constructs a visual memory. The concept exposes a history that do not forget the historical experience of a catastrophe, as historicism and progress do to official and whitewashed narratives. Didi-Huberman's readings of Walter Benjamin and his problematization of the link between image and history note the potentiality of the photographic image to construct a theory of visual memory. in images in spite of all. Thus, he confronts the intellectual hypothesis that consider the horror in the context of the Holocaust as something that cannot be represented. Sergio Villalobos observed on these debates Didi-Huberman positions against theory of the unrepresentable, exposes Walter Benjamin's instance of danger, the one we are exploring as the dialectical image, discontinuity, a constellation, or a flash. In his argument, Didi-Huberman analyzed 4 photos that contain traces of the infernal experience in Auschwitz, looking at them as images that are inviting to the materialist historian to say something about the horror they expose. As Didi-Huberman says, thus, it is about images in spite of all, in spite of the hell of Auschwitz, thus images in spite of all, in spite of the risks taken. In return, we must contemplate them, take them on, and try to comprehend them. So he's referring to 4 photos that were taken by Sonderkommandos and is defending the idea to say something, just to respond to the bravery of the Sonderkommandos who took the picture in the concentration camps. Following this critical approach to the photographic image and its role in keeping alive a visual memory of forbidden and forgotten past episode, I read Postcards. They contain traces of the horror in the Mexican Revolution, and as such, they need to be taken up to date to pose a critic of violence. The corpus of Postcard contains a high level of violence and shows its naturalization or acceptance. That postcard were objects that circulated through US mail system to reproduce an ideological perspective of the Mexican conflict, to justify violence against revolutionaries, and to popularize the racial conception of a lawless Mexico. Similarly, the back of this postcard also expresses the discriminatory perspective. It is not common in the archives to find postcards with writings on the back. The postcard backs are often empty. In the Palace of the Governor Photo Archive in Santa Fe, this postcard sent on August 2016 says, well, or with, I tried to figure out with the archivist what is writing there because the handwriting is confusing. But hello, you should be down here and have a good time and drive a truck. They are going to hand out 3 Frankies, we don't know. Write me and let me know how everything is and what stuff you have at Union. Violence is evident when he invites the postcard recipient to go to the front and have fun with dead bodies. And a critique of such violence needs to be raised in the present day, especially since racial stereotypes have not ended nor has bordered violence in current times. Furthermore, the image contains elements that exceed the Anglo-Saxon perspective or the representation of the winner of history. In these cases, winners burning the loser rebel as a cleaning process or ironizing the content of the corpse with banal notes on postcard bars. This excess has to do with the possibility of saying something about the horror of the past in spite of. That's it. Thank you.
In the beginning, about how this project fits within your overall?
Yes, I can do it. I don't know if I can do it in short, but I can do it. Yeah, well, I am researching photography in Latin American Revolution throughout the 20th century. But this part of the project, I would say, is related to a research I am doing about the beginning of the 20th century, the banana wars in Central America and Mexico. So we have these cases of American postcards during the Mexican Revolution that I am approaching to problematize violence in the revolution, because the revolution is like the monumental event that created the modern nation in Mexico. So I am thinking about, okay, how this nation was formed then. with this kind of essays. And then the other case I am working on is El Salvador in 1932, because in 1932, in El Salvador, there was an ethnocide or genocide against communist and Mayan Pipil indigenous population. And it is very interesting because for me at least, in 1932, we are 20 years later of the Mexican Revolution. So technology to reproduce and produce images was, better than in the revolution. However, there is, and as far as I know, there is almost no picture of the genocide in El Salvador. In the Mexican Revolution, we have millions of photos. And when I say millions, I am not exaggerating, because we have the Casa Sol archive in Mexico, we have the newspaper, we have the postcard in the United States. So it's a very big, photographic corpus. And in El Salvador, I have found in El Salvador and in Canada, because Canada was involved in the genocide, in total, like 20 to 30 photos of the genocide. I don't know, probably they could be more in newspaper. I need to do more research. But that is a contact point I am thinking about. And in the future, I want to complement it with the US occupation of Nicaragua, because it's from 1912 to 1933. And my fair, approximation is that photography like in El Salvador. We don't have too many images about the US occupation. So the Mexican Revolution in that sense is exceptional. But in the question I am trying to develop is how these images may allow us to reassess historical violence, and why this question on historical violence would be relevant in the present. And in that sense, the critique of progress or the critique of the dominant temporality is something that I want to think from today. I mean, we are talking about the past, historical event, etc., but the ideology of progress is still now, and the continuity of violence is happening right now. So if we think about the border, we can find pictures like this today, probably, with immigrants trying to cross the border, etc. So if we can see a different temporal or political regime, is like the question I am researching through photography.
We do have a question in the chat from Sergio, and so explain a little bit more about what archives you visited during your time there.
Sure. Sergio Villalobos. Hola, Sergio. Archives about postcards. Well, postcards are in many archives. I have been in Los Angeles, the Getty Research Institute. I went to El Paso Public Library, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And that is all in the United States. I don't know too much about postcard in Mexico. And now I am doing this research in the southwest region of the United States. And here I visit two archives, the Southwest Research Center in UNM and the photo archive in Santa Fe. But I know there are much more in Arizona, in Las Cruces, here in New Mexico, more in El Paso, and probably in other cities as well. So in that sense, the archive, that is what I try to say in the presentation. It's a question about the future, because the archive with the common sense, okay, we are researching the past, but when we are researching the past, is something that can open question that are not only reduced to a neutral past, is something that can have consequences in the future. So that is, I think archival research could be, could give some resources and element to develop this question toward the future. Sergio?
Do you plan to go to Columbus on the to?
Well, I could go, but I know that I'm not going to find. Well, probably I will find. I don't know. They have an historical society there. Maybe there are some photos, and they do like an annual commemoration of the Pancho Villas, right? So people from Mexico, they cross the border in horses to Columbus just to commemorate the invasion. Yeah. But yeah, it will be great to be there because used to see the place and maybe ask people if they have photos. But I think that in terms of researching photograph here in the archives, or I mean in Santa Fe or UNM, probably I can find more material than Columbus. But I do want to go at some point.
We have another question in the chat. Catherine, she says, Juan, I really enjoyed your talk. One of your main ideas is that postcards offer a perspective on the revolution that is fundamentally different from that available in the hegemonic archives. Can you draw an analogy with the availability of images on the internet today? That is, does the internet offer an anarchic perspective on history analogous to the postcards?
Okay, hola Kate, oh yeah, well, yeah, that's true. The point there is the democratization of the image, because the question, as I understand, is postcards are available on internet as well. So how this public archive, which is internet, is also different from the hegemonic archive or the Casa Sola archive. So yeah, but I'm not sure if the question is about the availability of images about the Mexican Revolution on internet today, or images of violence on the border in general, because we have on internet we can find a lot of images about violence in Chihuahua, Ciudad Juárez, or on the border itself, and also postcards from the revolution. Collectors, they sell postcards through internet. Well, the archives, a lot of these images are available online. And yeah, I think that internet, it has the anarchic potentiality. In that sense, anarchic is important to clarify. It's not like the political anarchy, but it's more a notion related to the archive, arche. Anarche is a Greek word that means the beginning, and also the commandment, and commando is like the power. So we have the arche, the archontic interpretation of text, the hegemonic archive, which is the official narrative, and we also have the anarchical archive, which is the question I tried to say about the future. It's an archive that we don't know the official or authorized narrative about the resources, but we can make new interpretation, basically. And there's a new. Yeah, it's not about the abundance of images, but it's about the critical approach we have to deal with them. Yeah, that is the biggest question, because at some point is how we can see images of violence with a critical perspective. It's a long debate. There is an example of a photograph in the Vietnam War, a child that is burning after a napalm shelling. Rancière, a philosopher, he said, okay, we are seeing this crude image, but is anesthesia. We are not thinking about this. We are just seeing it. We can have lunch, seeing the news with violence. Yeah, so how to approach critically images is the question. So what we can say or what we can think about images beyond this anesthesiante, this this non-critical approach. That is something that I don't know if I have an answer, but I try to observe postcard in this sense. I mean, in this critical, with this through this critical perspective. But I do agree that there is a lot of images, images of violence, images of death, images of war from the past, from the present, that are online, that are in the news, and we can see them, and that's all. Nothing changed. We don't think critically about it. So it's something to consider, yes. I don't know, Katie, if I answered the question or.
I'm sure you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Juan. I think we're done after June, but thank you so much for your time and the presentation. I don't know if people can actually follow it over here, but the presentation will be recorded on YouTube, so here shortly. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. That's great.
I'd much rather come here in person, so.
Yeah.
Trying to get the product come out more.
It's hard to get the same level of sort of engagement when you're watching.
I know.
Yeah. No, in person is much better for sure.
So I had a comment about postcard because my first time when I went to Poland to do research, coming from the Caribbean, where postcards is the beach, wish you were here having a fun time, but over there it's all about this, memorialization of the Second World War, and all the postcards are very sad and like, wars are blown away, or the camps, and I couldn't never understood that, but like this helps me put it into perspective, because probably the use of postcard was related to wars rather than the commercialization of this fun places that I don't know if you know when that there was this cultural shift. As I'm a historian, I'm always interested in continuities and changes. So
but
I don't know.
You mean the change between like the nice content to the world?
Yeah, like it was pretty clear to me that the origins of postcard was based on documented wars and things like that. So if we go back in time, they'll be like very sad postcards. But more modern times, and I don't know if it's a regional thing, but from the Caribbean, everything is, all you can see in postcard is nothing sad. Like you cannot, you don't put sadness and postcard together over there.
Yeah.
You don't want anything sad because you're trying to show people your vacation or.
Exactly, it's like a vacationing thing, postcard. So I wonder when that change happened in modern history, a postcard ended up, so for Poland, ended up in this, memorization of horrors and atrocities, but it was more memorization of fun times and having a vacation.
That's a good question.
Yeah, so.
That's interesting. Yeah, because at some point they stopped to produce this kind of postcard.
Yeah, I wonder if it's, World War II was like the cutoff time, or.
It could be. That's a good point. I know that the lynching of the African American, the postcard they were produced until the 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Collectibles.
Mhm.
My family has a postcard of a great grandfather serving on the front in World War I in Italy. So all these soldiers would go and get their photo taken, you know, as soon as, I don't know, there was like a field photograph but they would send it back to their family. And it was, because a lot of them didn't survive. And so definitely a change from what you see now, which is selling the tourism, selling all the positive stuff.
I wonder if it took off like in the 60s or 70s.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question.
And now I want to go back to Puerto Rico and look at old postcards to see, you know, what were they sending in the early 20th century.
Mhm. From Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I imagine there are postcards about the US invasion.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's makes me think about. Thank you.
Okay, interesting. And now I don't know if there are so many postcards about, probably not, you know, because like you said, now postcards are
Well, if you go
vacation.
to Poland, you find those postcards still.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I went there last time. Well, last time I wasn't looking for postcard, 2016. But when I started doing my research, 2001, 2003, until 2005. Yeah, those where you will go to any bookstores and you'll see, you know, very sad postcards about World War II.
Mhm.
It's over there, you still have that consumerism. That coming from the Caribbean for me was shocking. It's like, why people want to buy this and send to their family? And for me, it was like, so what do you write to people? Like, wish you were here in a camp?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have a hard time here.
Like,
Yeah, it's interesting. And now I show like the soft postcard, in my opinion.
software.
I mean, there are images that are really hard to see. And they produce
Oh,
it.
that you selected the ones that you could show here.
Well, I know I can show everything because they are historical sources, but there are postcards about mass graves, you know, that are more graphic than the one. Well, the one I showed, they are graphic because they are burning the bodies and everything, but there are others that are really like you don't want to see them.
Yeah, and it seems that by the 1930s, Americans wise up because it's probably they're not documenting like ethnocide. It's like, oh, we don't want this on a postcard.